Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, talking Buckeyes football with Steve Hillwagon. He is senior Big Ten writer at 247 Sports. Join him on bucknuts.com. More of a quarterback shuffle than we had at this point last week, with now a 1-for-1 swap, as it's almost a three-way deal between Georgia, Ohio State, and Miami, as the quarterbacks continue to shuffle across the nation and find the most advantageous place for them to compete for a job. Steve, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Mark. What's going on?
Not too much. Trying to keep track of this transfer portal. This has become like the term in college football these days, is this transfer portal. We've all had to become accustomed to what it all means.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's taken on a new significance, I guess, here in 2019. And really, it's kind of formalized what has been always kind of a backroom type process of a player reaching out and trying to get his own school to release him and all these other things. It really kind of formalizes the process and makes it kind of streamlines it and lets colleges know which players in particular are interested in changing. Schools that have a sudden need, let's say they had an outstanding offensive lineman or two that went to the professional ranks. Now they can go straight to this database and pluck off the name of one or two people who they might be able to court as either a graduate transfer or a traditional transfer. And I don't know, I guess just makes it much more of a transient industry. Let's just say that at this point, with the way guys are changing teams, and the toothpaste is out of the tube now. And I think it's only going to continue to be like this going forward.
Yeah, Steve, the pattern just continues to repeat itself over and over and over now, where if there suddenly turns out to be a particular quarterback who establishes themselves as the guy, one of the best in the nation, that next guy in line who had expectations of starting for 2 or 3 years is off for sure. Now, it just seems like it's almost an automatic with a lot of these guys. I don't know if there's just more of a glut of quarterbacks at high-profile programs today versus even 5 years ago. But if we go back 10 or 15 years, it just seemed as though if somebody established themselves as the quarterback, maybe a sophomore or junior, then they held the job for a couple of years, and the other guys were resigned to the fact that they were going to wait in line unless there was an injury or the starter really faltered. And I'm talking about the really elite programs. And otherwise, you waited for your turn, and these guys just don't seem to be willing to do that.
Yeah, it is kind of the way of the world right now that everybody expects instant gratification. And it's unfortunate, I think, in some regards. I think that some guys are losing out on the opportunity. If you stay the course where you're at and put in the time and really, really work at it, the opportunity may be yours one day. And I think Dwayne Haskins, as it turned out, was a great example of that. He sat behind J.T. Barrett for a couple of years, kind of minded his P's and Q's, and got that development. And I think that's an important thing. Martell is now leaving and going to Miami. And the question is, he's going to walk in there sight unseen, and they're not going to know him, and he's not going to know them. And it's almost like he's starting over at square one. But, again, he is accomplished. He has played at least a few games, a little bit of activity with Ohio State. So there is a small body of work for him to work off of. But, and there were a lot of people critical of the way he kind of handled the situation, coming out at the Rose Bowl and saying, I'm not going to leave. This is my job, etc. I don't know if something happened in the interim, if he and Ryan Day, who's been his position coach for 2 full years and would have a full idea of what Tate Martell can and cannot do, whether they had a meeting of the minds and he came away from that unhappy with what he heard. I don't know. I guess we'll wait and see if anybody ever comments about what transpired here. Obviously, it's been a coaching change from Urban Meyer to Ryan Day, is now the head coach. And so the Buckeyes bringing in Justin Fields from Georgia as a transfer, and their hope is that he's obviously going to be immediately eligible because of circumstances that occurred at Georgia. And now Tate Martell is kind of taking his ball, and he kicked the tires a little bit with Louisville, West Virginia, and Miami. went down to Miami, made a visit there, and committed on the spot, basically, to Manny Diaz in Miami, the coach that they have there. But here's the thing: even if he's approved for immediate eligibility, they have a freshman, N'Kosi Perry, who played quite a bit this past year, and probably going into the offseason believing it's his job. So, the best case scenario is that he's eligible. I don't know that he's got a leg to stand on in that regard. I think that more likely he'll sit out a year and be eligible in 2020. But even then, he'd have to fight Perry, you would think, for that starting job, and he'd be down to just a couple of years of eligibility left. So I'm not sure what his motives or thought process, or if there was one, other than he wanted to get away from Ohio State, which it's unfortunate. He put 2 good years into the program, and you would have liked to see, kids see these things through. But again, I don't think it's endemic just to Tate Martell. This is something that's kind of swept the entire landscape. It's been prevalent in basketball for years now, and there's always greener pastures somewhere else. Sometimes there are, and sometimes there aren't. But I guess that's kind of the way of the world right now.
We talk a lot of Miami football. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. N'Kosi Perry, as you mentioned, Steve, played about half the time, as it was certainly a juggling act that Mark Richt had going in Miami between he and Malik Rocher this past season. Rocher, the senior, who faltered down the stretch the previous season, but was handed the job or won the job coming out of camp, and then he faltered against LSU, and within 2 or 3 weeks it was N'Kosi Perry's job, and back and forth, and he had a decent season, completed just a little over 50% of his passes. But they also have a stud in Jaron Williams, who's a year behind Perry, that I'm sure expects to start as well. So it's going to be a 3-man race there with Martell. And I got to think Tate Martell obviously has also witnessed the emergence of Joe Burrow, who obviously went to a top flight program and was able to take the reins there at LSU.
Yeah, no doubt. Joe Burrow was kind of the blueprint on how to do this. Of course, his circumstances were a little bit different because he was able to graduate in 3 years. Tate Martell, I'm not sure if he's going to have that option or not, whether he would receive his degree from Ohio State this calendar year by August and be able to enroll as a grad transfer and have immediate eligibility. I'm not sure. He arrived at Ohio State roughly 2 years ago this week as an early enrolling freshman in 2017, would have 2 full years of college under his belt. And perhaps with a couple more semesters, spring and summer, perhaps he would have enough credits to be able to do it. The college players typically take a few classes in the summer. So they're on maybe in some regards, like Joe Burrow proved, you can be on a faster track and graduate in 3 years. I'm not sure if Martell, what his exact situation is, and if that's what he is trying to consider doing in enrolling Miami as a graduate, which would make him immediately eligible. Again, we don't have any details on this whole situation, and just kind of watching it from afar, I guess, at this point. I agree with you. I think that Miami's got two guys at the quarterback position that really fit the bill pretty well, and that wherever you go, if you're at a Power 5 school, no one's just going to hand you that job because so much is at stake. And I think Martell's going to find that out, certainly, that competition is going to be there no matter where you go.
For as much as that's the case, that you're going to face some stiff competition, we recently saw Blake Barnett leave Alabama, where he started at least one game, and then he goes out to Arizona State. He can't wrestle the job away from the starter there, and then he finds himself at South Florida. He found 3 schools in the span of 3 years. So this is getting a bit ridiculous, but also keeps us all on our toes as to what's going to happen next. And of course, Jalen Hurts announced today that he's leaving Alabama for Oklahoma.
That's an interesting one as well.
Yeah.
I mean, he was part of a championship team and played obviously in the championship game this past week or so for Alabama against Clemson, and is now headed to Oklahoma. And they lose Kyler Murray, and obviously are hopeful that Hurts or whoever it is at quarterback can help them win the Big 12 again and get back into the playoffs. So I think it's going to be again, another interesting year. And I don't know what to say. There's a hot stove league, I guess, for college football, and we're into it right now with all the guys jumping and moving from school to school and everything else that's happened. It's been pretty amazing just since the bowl games and the championship game were played.
Yeah, this is the time of year things typically settle down, and I like to look for historical topics to break down and positional groupings and all those other things, kind of evergreen material, as we call it. And I just haven't had much time to do that because we're chasing down all these stories concerning quarterbacks juggling their roles in their schools. Matthew Baldwin, for as much as you say, Steve, and it's certainly a great point, that if you show up on campus at a Power 5 school, you're going to have to battle for a job against a pretty good player or two. It would appear that Justin Fields, they're going to do everything possible. It would have to be a complete collapse for him not to be the starter. And what Matthew Baldwin would be the backup quarterback most likely.
Yeah, that's what it appears right now. He'd be one of two scholarship quarterbacks if things started now. I don't know if they're going to try to find a grad transfer of their own or some other method. Whether there's a high school prospect out there for 2019 that might take a look. They had Dwayne Mathis committed, and he ended up going to Georgia instead. So it was almost an even one-for-one swap, Mathis for Fields, which was interesting to say the least. Ohio State does have a commitment for 2020 in Jack Miller from Arizona, and it appears he could be the, quote, quarterback of the future for the Buckeyes and Ryan Day. But Matthew Baldwin is a guy that Ryan Day went down to Texas, and they were looking to add a quarterback late in the process last year. He was a one-year starter there at Lake Travis High School and helped his team get to the championship game a year ago, was injured in the championship game, suffered a bad knee injury, and really didn't get full go at Ohio State till mid-season. People said by the end of the year they were very impressed with his development and how fast he was able to get back to full speed after his injury. And it sounds like going into spring football, he will be full go. And at this point, you would assume the reps are going to be split down the middle between Fields and Baldwin. They have a couple walk-ons on the team as well that are also probably going to get a little bit of work too. But I think most of the focus as of right now would be on Fields and Baldwin, and just hope they can keep those two guys healthy. I'm sure they're going to try and add somebody somehow, some way along the line. I think it's up in the air, the status of Chris Chuganoff, who came over from West Virginia a year ago. He played, I think, in one game for Ohio State this past year. Not sure if he's going to be back for 2019 or not. So if he is and he's eligible, then maybe he gives them that insurance policy, because he's at least got a little bit of college experience from his time at West Virginia. But certainly they've put all their eggs in Fields' basket. Baldwin is a developmental guy, a guy that they're going to work really hard to bring along as fast as they can. You have a new set of eyes there. Mike Yursich has come in from Oklahoma State as the new quarterbacks coach and co-offensive coordinator. Kevin Wilson is still there. Ryan Day is still there. So between the three of them, they're going to put the best players out there on the field. And my guess is Ohio State may not be quite as explosive as they were offensively, but at least defensively, they're probably not going to be quite as bad. So it'll be a little bit of a push-pull. Coach Day really cleaned house on that defensive staff of the five guys. The only guy coming back is Larry Johnson, the outstanding defensive line coach and outstanding recruiter. The other four jobs all have changed hands. So it'll be interesting, I guess, going forward to see what the push-pull will be with that defense. But I think people are excited about where things are headed for the spring. I did a thing last week, Mark. I looked at 19 of the top 25s that had been released really in the week since the January 1 games and the championship games. Ohio State was listed anywhere from 3rd to 7th. They were the top team in the Big Ten on just about every list. I think one guy had Michigan ahead of Ohio State on the basis of Shea Patterson returning. So, and again, Michigan should have another outstanding defense, even though they lose Bush and Gary up front. But again, I think that the Big Ten is going to be tough again next year, but Ohio State, just on the guys that they have coming back, the pleasant surprise that a guy like KJ Hill, a guy like Damon Arnett, Jordan Fuller, Malik Harrison, those guys are all coming back for one more year at Ohio State at least. I think that really helps the cause.
Talking Ohio State football with Steve Hellwagon. He's a Big Ten senior writer at 247 Sports. Join him at bucknuts.com. This has become, as we've been talking about, the season for quarterbacks moving locations, but it's long been the season for underclassmen to declare for the NFL draft. And the latest, even though there was no official announcement that needed to come on Monday, Kendall Sheffield, by all indications, is moving on to the NFL draft. He's certainly making all the preparations to do so. A fourth-year junior cornerback that we just talked about in our last conversation, Steve, as being a guy who he came in very highly touted, transfer from Alabama, struggled early, but certainly had a strong stretch drive here in 2018.
Yeah, Kendall Sheffield is a guy that's going to have all the measurables when they go to the NFL Combine, probably going to run a very fast 40 time. I think he's going to be a guy that you get into your team, probably a mid-round pick, maybe second, third-round pick, depending on how he tests and how he interviews, maybe third, fourth, I don't know. But at any rate, you get him in and you develop him and you rework some of his fundamentals. And you take that raw physical ability that Kendall Sheffield has and turn him into a workable NFL defensive back, whether it's a nickel back, a corner, whatever it may be. I think that he's got the potential to have a pretty good NFL career. I think it's going to be incumbent upon him to change some things fundamentally, going from the college ranks to the NFL ranks. Obviously, you can't put your hands on the receivers as much or at all in the NFL. They really frown at that. There's a lot of flags that get thrown, and that's not acceptable, certainly. So Sheffield's going to have to work on some things, obviously. But, yeah, kind of a surprise, I suppose, that he left. I think he didn't really want to be at Ohio State more than a year or two, wanted to get to the league any way that he could. And obviously he's got those measurables, I think, that they're looking for in NFL defensive backs in terms of size and speed. And I think he's going to be a guy that could potentially be, a 6, 7, 8 year NFL player if it all comes together for him. So Ohio State loses 6 guys to the NFL, which it sounds like an awful lot. You knew you were losing Nick Bosa. He was out of the picture after week 3 when he got injured. He was done. Dre'Mont Jones had toyed with the idea a year ago and came back. Mike Weber had toyed with the idea a year ago and had come back. So it was not a surprise. And in fact, those guys both announced before the Rose Bowl. So those 3 were gone. You knew that. Sheffield was the last one to decide. And you also had in there Michael Jordan, an outstanding offensive lineman. He was an All-American in some lists. He'd played 2 years at guard and 1 year at center, started 3 years for Ohio State, one of the rare guys who had started as a true freshman. He's leaving. That leaves a void at center. Seems like Josh Myers will probably fill that position. He was a highly touted recruit a year or two ago. So he's gone, and I'm missing – I mentioned Weber. There were 6 of them. Oh, Dwayne Haskins, the quarterback. How could I forget Dwayne Haskins? Talking off the top of my head. I should have a written out list in front of me, I guess, if my memory's going to go bad. But
I wasn't helping you out, Steve. I was digging. Sometimes when you dig that far, you forget the obvious.
Yeah, you forget the guy at the top of the list, Dwayne Haskins, who could be the number 1 quarterback taken in the draft. Could be a top 10 pick. I think the New York Giants in particular may have an eye out for him since they took Barkley last year. Could maybe go for the quarterback this year, the future for them. But again, he's got some things he needs to prove, certainly between Ohio State's Pro Day and the Combine and his interviews and his workouts and everything else. So we'll see, just an uncanny season for him, 50 touchdown passes in 14 games, just unbelievable. He set records that I'm not sure anybody at Ohio State in the Big Ten will ever touch in terms of a single season. And So it's going to be a lot of fun watching him go forward in the NFL.
And Steve, getting back to Sheffield, we may see a glimpse into the future this Sunday when watching the NFC Championship game and talking about defensive back talent on one field, with Ohio State helping out those New Orleans Saints with Eli Apple, Von Bell, and Marshawn Lattimore. And what a game he had last week in the divisional round with 2 picks.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The Ohio State guys, their fingerprints were all over that. Michael Thomas, the wide receiver, he was selected as an All-Pro. They have Ted Ginn Jr., who would be his, I think, 13th season, or no, 12th season in the NFL. So he's really stood the test of time. Would be great to see if he's able to spark a big play here in the NFC Championship game or the Super Bowl, if they're able to get past the Rams, which will be no small task, certainly, to win that epic contest this week. But they have Kurt Coleman, who's a veteran guy, Von Bell, who's a starter at safety, does an outstanding job. Then Marshawn Lattimore and Eli Apple. Eli Apple was vilified by a lot of people with the Giants, just never could really find his way, I guess, in his couple years there with the Giants. Got traded over at midseason, and it's like he's found new life again with the New Orleans Saints and done an outstanding job. And Lattimore, 2 interceptions in a playoff game last week. Nothing short of fantastic. So I know a lot of Ohio State people will be rooting and watching that NFC game. There aren't a lot of other Buckeyes even really still in the playoffs. I think there's a long snapper for the Rams, Jake McQuaid. And then the New England Patriots have 2 guys, John Simon, who was an outstanding defensive end. I'm not sure how much John actually even plays for the Patriots. I'd have to look up what his status is. I know he's been kind of in and out with injuries throughout much of his career. And the other guy is Nate Ebner, who's been kind of a career special teams guy. And he's probably in his 8th or 9th year now in the NFL as well. And I believe he was drafted as a special teams guy. So didn't even really play offense or defense at Ohio State. So that's kind of an interesting situation that he's made it this long and stuck with Bill Belichick and the Patriots. And the Buckeyes don't have anybody on the Chiefs, so I'm not sure I'll be rooting a whole lot for the Chiefs. But then again, the Patriots, I don't know how much I could root for the Patriots, the evil empire, either. But I don't know. It's going to be a lot of fun watching these games on Sunday.
John Simon's got himself a couple sacks this year and about 10 or 12 tackles.
Yeah. I don't know that he's necessarily a frontline starting guy. But he may appear in some sets or whatever the situation may be. But he's been a little bit of a journeyman. He left Ohio State after the 2012 season. He was on that senior on the undefeated team that Urban Meyer had the first year. And Urban Meyer tells the story about how John Simon and a lot of those guys had the opportunity, because the team was going to be on probation, was not going to play in a bowl game, that they could have left, and all of them stayed to a man, and they went 12-0, and that was the cornerstone of what became just an amazing run for Urban Meyer at Ohio State. Back on Michael Thomas, he told the story yesterday on the radio. Mike Thomas, he went to a prep school from Woodland Hills, California, Taft High School. He is the nephew of Keyshawn Johnson, the former star from USC and various NFL teams. And he came to Ohio State. I think 2012 was his first year. He had 2 catches. He redshirted in 2013, didn't play. And they had a meeting with his dad and Keyshawn Johnson and Mike Thomas, and they sat down in a room and said, you're not getting it. You're just not with the program. And he said they could have picked him up and taken him right out of Ohio State right there and moved him someplace else. But instead, he dedicated himself, became one of the hardest working members of the team. It took a meeting like that where they had to bring him correct. And this is another Urban Meyer turnaround success story. Helped win the national championship in 2014, outstanding 2015 season, left for the NFL. And there's some statistic out there in 3 seasons, he's done stuff nobody else has ever done in their first 3 seasons. I don't know if it's catches or what it is, but he has piled up the plays and the catches and the touchdowns. And his Twitter handle is Can't Guard Mike. And he wasn't always can't guard Mike. So there's a reason why these guys are at the top of their profession. And it took Urban Meyer and Keyshawn Johnson and his dad, I think, to bring him around to where he is today.
It is pretty remarkable because I remember seeing him in a spring game, and I believe that was in 2013. And then
Yes,
he just
had
kind
a
of
huge
disappeared.
game and then didn't play. It was weird why he didn't play. But as the story comes out later, he wasn't attending to his studies and wasn't up to snuff on all of his responsibilities, whatever it may have been off the field. And, to invoke the name Zach Smith, he was involved in that in a good way, trying to get his situation turned around. The other guy, Corey Smith, who was in the same boat. And, eventually by 14 and 15, those guys had come around a little bit and become productive players on the championship team.
Yeah, and to the point where Drew Brees can't speak enough about Michael Thomas. And after the game last weekend, I heard him make the comment, hey, what you see on the field on game day, he does that every day in practice. He plays that hard.
Exactly. And that's what the best players do. There's no excuse and there's no alternative or no substitute for hard work. This is a lesson that kids out there, as we started this discussion talking about guys, I don't like to say this, cutting and running. The other option is to immerse yourself in the material, whatever it is, if it's physical workouts, mental preparation, whatever it is, and give yourself the best opportunity that you can to be successful. And that's what successful people do typically. So there is no substitute for that.
Steve Hellwagon joining us from Bucknuts. Steve, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but just to whet the appetite of some folks out there, we will be back hopefully next week. And Steve will line us up for those Buckeyes that may leave early this time next year.
Yeah, already talking about that a little bit on bucknuts.com. And also they're going into another stretch run on recruiting. And maybe in the next week or so, we'll have a couple of names of guys that could be added to the 2019 recruiting class. They don't have a lot of space, even though, here on my handy dandy list, I can take Martell and I can scratch him off. So that opens up a scholarship for somebody here in this 2019 class to take it. And so we'll see what direction that's going to go as well.
Excellent, Steve. Always look forward to it. Thanks so much for the time.
All right, Mark. Take care.